Our story begins not with grand declarations or in halls of power, but by the quiet, lapping edge of the Charles River in colonial Boston. Here, a boy named Benjamin Franklin would often steal away from the bustling sounds of the candle and soap workshop that was his home. The water held a particular fascination for him, a mirror to the sky and a pathway to the wider world he already sensed was out there. He was not a child of privilege. His formal schooling ended at 10, and his days were soon filled with the practical trade of printing under his brother James. Yet, it was in these moments of stolen solitude by the river that a foundational layer of his character was formed, a profound curiosity about the natural world and its forces, a curiosity that sought not just to wonder, but to understand. Young Ben's hands, even then, were instruments of inquiry. He famously fashioned makeshift paddles to increase his swimming speed, a simple act of invention born from observation and a desire to improve. He would later write with a smile about tying himself to a kite to be pulled across the water, a precursor to the playful yet precise experimentation that would define his life. The river taught him about currents, both of water and of life. It reflected the relentless flow of time and opportunity, and it whispered of destinations far beyond the Boston harbor. This early, intuitive dialogue with nature instilled a calmness, a patient methodology. He learned that answers were not seized in haste, but observed, coaxed from the world through careful attention. The rhythm of the print shop, which we will soon explore, was in its own way another kind of current. But before that rhythm claimed him, the water offered a different lesson, the power of perspective. Lying on his back on the riverbank, watching clouds drift, or studying the way light fractured on the waves, young Franklin practiced the art of seeing. He saw not just a body of water, but a system, not just a breeze, but a force that could be harnessed. This ability to shift his gaze from the minute detail of a duck's feather to the vast expanse of the horizon was a cognitive habit he would carry into politics, diplomacy, and science. The boy by the water was assembling the toolkit he would use to build a life of monumental consequence. We must also imagine the sounds that accompanied these formative scenes, the distant cry of gulls, the gentle rustle of reeds, the soft murmur of his own thoughts. This sonic landscape was as important as the visual one. In an age before constant noise, the ability to listen to the world, to one's own mind, was a cultivated skill. Franklin's later famed equanimity in debate, his capacity to sit silently in a contentious room and then offer the perfect, simplifying proposition, has its roots here. He was comfortable with quiet, with the space between thoughts where insight grows. The river did not shout its secrets, it revealed them to the patient observer. His relationship with this elemental force was also deeply practical. As a teenager, his proficiency in the water nearly led him to a life as a sailor, a path his father wisely discouraged. Yet, the affinity never left him. Decades later, as a mature scientist, he would chart the Gulf Stream, that great river within the Atlantic Ocean, transforming transatlantic navigation. The boy who pondered local currents grew into the man who mapped oceanic ones. This connection reminds us that the passions of our youth, if nurtured by a disciplined mind, can evolve into the profound contributions of our adulthood. They are not mere nostalgia, but the first drafts of our life's work. Furthermore, the water symbolized a cleansing clarity. In the complex moral and political landscapes he would later navigate, Franklin often returned to principles of simplicity and utility, which he first intuited in nature. Just as water seeks its level, he sought foundational truths upon which a new society could be built. The calm surface of the river, hiding powerful depths beneath, is a fitting metaphor for Franklin's own demeanor, outwardly placid and witty, yet inwardly driven by a profound and relentless intellectual energy. His early environment provided not just a playground, but a first library, a first laboratory, and a first sanctuary for the mind that would help conceive a nation. Thus, as we leave the young Franklin by the water's edge, we carry with us the image of a mind already in motion, learning its first lessons in fluid dynamics and patient inquiry. The world of men and their disputes would soon demand his attention, but the calm, empirical temperament forged in these quiet hours would become his signature. He walked away from the riverbank not with a head full of dreams, but with a mind trained to observe, a heart attuned to the steady, reliable patterns of the natural world, patterns he would spend a lifetime understanding, and in understanding, seeking to improve for all. The steady, rhythmic thump of the printing press became the heartbeat of Benjamin Franklin's young adulthood, a mechanical pulse that shaped his intellect, his fortunes, and, ultimately, the communication of ideas in a fledgling America. Arriving in Philadelphia as a penniless runaway, his skills with type and ink were his only currency. The print shop was more than a workplace. It was a university, a political arena, and a nerve center for the colonies. Here, amidst the smell of lampblack and the feel of rag paper, Franklin mastered a trade that was, in the 18th century, synonymous with the power to inform and persuade. Each pull of the lever, each alignment of the form, was a lesson in precision, order, and the tangible impact of words. His daily routine was a symphony of purposeful activity. Before dawn, he would be at his bench, composing type, his fingers moving with a practiced certainty that turned scattered letters into coherent thought. The physicality of the work, lifting heavy forms, inking the rollers, feeding the paper, built a resilient strength, both in body and character. This was not abstract philosophy, it was philosophy made manifest, one letter at a time. The rhythm was meditative, repetitive action that left space for the mind to wander, to compose, to critique. As his own body fell into the press's rhythm, his mind worked on essays, aphorisms, and plans that would later flow from that same press. Through Poor Richard's Almanac, Franklin found a voice that transcended the shop's walls. The almanac was a humble publication, full of weather predictions, planting advice, and household tips. But within its pages, Franklin, writing as the frugal Richard Saunders, sprinkled the now famous aphorisms that distilled his philosophy of industry, humility, and common sense. Early to bed and early to rise, a penny saved is a penny earned. These were not merely clever sayings. They were the rhythmic, memorable beats of a new, pragmatic American ethos, broadcast from his press to countless hearths and farms. The printer's rhythm became a cultural rhythm, setting the tempo for a society learning to value self-reliance and diligent enterprise. The shop also functioned as a social and intellectual hub. It was a post office, a gathering place for debate, and the birthplace of the Junto, Franklin's leather apron club for aspiring tradesmen and thinkers. Here, the ideas that were set in type by day were discussed, challenged, and refined by night. The circulation of newspapers like the Pennsylvania Gazette mirrored this circulation of ideas, creating a web of shared knowledge that began to bind the disparate colonies together. Franklin understood that the press was not just a tool for reporting events, but for creating a public, a community of readers who shared a common discourse. This environment honed Franklin's unique genius for collaborative improvement. From organizing the first volunteer fire company and a public library to establishing a hospital and an academy that would become the University of Pennsylvania, many of his civic projects were, in essence, extensions of the printer's ethos. They were about setting things in order, creating systems, and distributing the benefits as widely as possible, much like distributing a newspaper. The methodical process of printing, editing, proofing, printing, distributing became a model for his approach to public life. He was, in effect, typesetting the components of a civil society. Moreover, the international trade in paper, ink, and books connected his small shop to a transatlantic world of ideas. He corresponded with printers and thinkers in London, Dublin, and the Caribbean, creating a network that was both professional and intellectual. This global perspective, forged through the practical concerns of his trade, prevented his worldview from becoming parochial. He saw Philadelphia as a node in a vast network, an outlook that would prove invaluable when he later needed to negotiate for aid and alliances in the courts of Europe. The printer was always, fundamentally, a communicator, and his medium grew from colonial broadsheets to diplomatic treaties. Thus, the rhythmic life of the printer's shop provided the disciplined framework for Franklin's boundless energy. It grounded his flights of scientific fancy in tangible reality. It translated his civic ideals into actionable projects. It gave his wit and wisdom a vehicle to reach the people. The constant, reassuring thump of the press was the sound of a man building his world, not with bricks and mortar alone, but with ideas made durable through ink and repetition. It was in this space, fingers stained black, surrounded by the quiet industry of apprentices and the rustle of fresh broadsheets, that the artisan forged the tools and the temperament that would make him a founding father. Beyond the public spheres of politics and printing existed the private, luminous world of Benjamin Franklin's scientific curiosity, a realm where his calm, methodical mind found its purest expression. Freed from the immediate pressures of debate or commerce, Franklin engaged with the puzzles of the natural world not as a distant academic, but as a delighted observer and an ingenious tinkerer. His science was democratic and practical, born of a desire to understand how things work in order to make life better, safer, and more comprehensible. This intellectual journey was characterized not by fevered obsession, but by a serene and persistent sense of wonder, a quality that makes his explorations especially soothing to contemplate. His most famous foray, of course, was into the mysterious nature of electricity. In the mid-18th century, electricity was a parlor trick, a virtue imbued in glass rods that produced sparks and shocks. Franklin saw a deeper pattern. Through a series of elegant experiments, detailed in clear, humble letters to his friend Peter Collinson in London, he began to unravel its secrets. He coined terms we still use today: battery, conductor, charge, positive, negative. He proposed the single fluid theory of electricity, a monumental leap in understanding. His famous kite experiment, though likely more dangerous and less theatrical than legend suggests, was the public culmination of years of quiet, careful thought, proving that lightning was indeed the same electrical force he had been studying in his Philadelphia home. Yet, to focus solely on the kite is to miss the gentle breadth of his inquisitiveness. He was a master of applied curiosity. Pondering the inefficient heat of his fireplace, he invented the Pennsylvania fireplace, or Franklin stove, which radiated more warmth into a room and saved fuel. Annoyed by having to switch between two pairs of spectacles for near and far vision, he crafted the first bifocal lenses, simply by cutting the lenses of two pairs in half and fitting them into a single frame. His studies of ocean currents, mentioned earlier, improved postal packet routes. Each investigation began with a simple, almost childlike question: why is it this way, and could it be better? This process was never hurried. Franklin's scientific mind worked like water eroding stone, not through force, but through persistent, gentle application. He would pose a question, design a simple experiment, observe the results with scrupulous honesty, and then allow his thoughts to simmer. He often let problems rest for months or years, returning to them with a fresh perspective. This patience was his greatest tool. It allowed him to avoid the dogma and heated disputes that entangled many of his contemporaries. His goal was not to win an argument, but to uncover a truth, an approach that lent his findings a remarkable durability. His calm demeanor was the perfect conductor for such inquiry. In the heat of a political dispute, emotions could cloud judgment, but in his quiet study or garden, Franklin cultivated a state of receptive clarity. He practiced what we might now call mindfulness, an ability to focus deeply on the present phenomenon, the arc of a spark, the flow of heat from a metal plate, the path of a storm cloud. This mental discipline enabled him to see connections where others saw only chaos. He viewed the natural world as a coherent, legible system, one that operated on principles that could be discovered through reason and experiment, a profoundly comforting notion in an age still shadowed by superstition. Furthermore, his scientific pursuits were deeply social. He corresponded with fellow enthusiasts across Europe, sharing data and ideas freely, helping to weave an international web of knowledge. He saw science as a collaborative enterprise for the betterment of humankind, a republic of letters that transcended national borders. This spirit of open inquiry and shared progress would later deeply influence his political vision for the American experiment. The calm, reasoned discourse of the laboratory stood in his mind as an ideal for the discourse of the public square. Thus, the chapter of Franklin's life dedicated to pure curiosity presents a portrait of serene intellect. It shows us a man who found profound peace and pleasure in the act of understanding his world. The flicker of a static spark in a dark room was, to him, a universe of possibility. The design of a better stove was a poem written in iron and physics. In these pursuits, we see the foundational American traits of practicality and innovation, but tempered by a uniquely Franklinian quality, a deep, abiding calm. It was the calm of a mind at home in the universe, unafraid of its mysteries and joyfully engaged in the gentle, endless work of solving them, one quiet experiment at a time. As the 1760s gave way to the 1770s, the comfortable rhythms of Benjamin Franklin's life were overtaken by the gathering storm of revolution. The philosophical hearth where he had once pondered scientific puzzles now warmed the architects of a new nation. Franklin, the elder statesman of the colonies, found himself transitioning from a loyal subject of the crown, seeking accommodation and reform, to a reluctant but resolute revolutionary. This was not a path he embraced with youthful fervor, but one he accepted with the heavy certainty of logic and broken trust. His home in London, once a center of convivial debate, became a tense diplomatic outpost, and later, his Philadelphia fireplace would host whispered conversations that echoed through history. For nearly 2 decades, Franklin served as an agent for several colonies in London, believing firmly in the potential of a unified British Empire. He worked tirelessly to bridge the growing divide, explaining the American perspective to Parliament and advocating for the rights of colonists as Englishmen. He took his morning chocolate in London cafes, debating with intellectuals, and basked in the recognition of the Royal Society. Yet, a series of political calamities, the Stamp Act, the Townshend Acts, the infamous Hutchinson Letters affair, and his own humiliating public chastisement before the Privy Council, slowly, irrevocably, eroded his faith. The calm negotiator was forced to conclude that reason and compromise had no place in the current British government's design. Returning to Philadelphia in 1775, on the eve of open war, Franklin arrived with a transformed understanding. The hearth he returned to was no longer just a family home. It was a crucible. His daughter Sally and his wife Deborah, who had held the household together during his long absences, now managed a home that was a hub of revolutionary activity. Here, Franklin, though weary from his voyage and grieving his wife's recent death, immediately stepped into the Continental Congress. His calm presence was a stabilizing force amidst the passionate, often fractious debates. He spoke rarely, but when he did, his words carried the weight of hard-earned experience and a perspective that stretched across the Atlantic. It was around both literal and metaphorical hearths that Franklin's genius for conciliation and practical detail proved invaluable. In the long, tense sessions at the Pennsylvania State House, he was the quiet man in the plain suit, often dozing in his chair or appearing to. His mind, however, was acutely awake. He served on the crucial committee of 5 tasked with drafting the Declaration of Independence, offering essential edits to Jefferson's soaring prose to strengthen its logic and appeal. More importantly, he worked in the background, on countless committees dealing with finance, postal service, and foreign alliances, building the administrative skeleton of a nation that did not yet exist. He understood that revolution required not just declarations, but systems. The signing of the Declaration in July 1776 was a solemn, frightening act of treason, not a festive celebration. Franklin, ever the calming wit, is said to have quipped, "We must, indeed, all hang together, or most assuredly we shall all hang separately." The humor masked a deadly serious truth and served to steady nerves. His own signature was bold and clear, a final, public break with the world he had long sought to reconcile. Following this, his hearthside duties changed once more. The revolution needed a diplomat, and Franklin, at age 70, was dispatched to France to seek the essential aid, without which the war would surely be lost. Thus, the Philadelphia hearth, which had witnessed his scientific musings and family life, now symbolized the warm, vital center of the rebellion. From it, Franklin had ventured to London as a supplicant and returned as a patriot. In its glow, he helped transform a protest into a cause, and a cause into a nation. The calm, persuasive energy he had once poured into scientific correspondence and civic projects was now directed entirely toward the survival and definition of the United States. The fires of revolution were stoked by many hands, with passion and fury, but Franklin's role was that of the steady, experienced hand tending the central flame, ensuring it provided both light and warmth, and did not consume everything in a reckless blaze. His was the calm at the heart of the storm, a tranquility born not of indifference, but of profound focus on the monumental task at hand. The scene shifts across the Atlantic to the gilded salons of Paris in the late 1770s. Here, Benjamin Franklin, now the revered Dr. Franklin, cultivated a persona that became one of the most potent diplomatic weapons of the American Revolution. Far from the battlefield's roar, the war was won in drawing rooms through charm, intellect, and calculated image. An evening at Passy, in the serene villa loaned by the philanthropist Jacques de Nathan-Laurey, was a masterpiece of soft power. Franklin, in his simple brown suit, fur cap, and spectacles, presented himself not as a rustic rebel, but as a philosophical sage from the New World, a living embodiment of Rousseau's noble savage refined by Enlightenment reason. These evenings were carefully staged yet effortlessly convivial. Franklin would hold court, surrounded by Europe's brightest minds, philosophes like Voltaire, whom he famously embraced, economists like Turgot, and scientists like Lavoisier. Conversation flowed like the fine wine, spanning politics, science, literature, and the arts. Franklin, a gifted raconteur, shared tales of America, its vast landscapes, and its virtuous, struggling people. He spoke not of military demands, but of shared ideals of liberty and progress, framing the American struggle as the front line of the Enlightenment's battle against tyranny. In these settings, the complex geopolitics of an alliance were gently woven into the fabric of intellectual and social fellowship. His famed simplicity was a deliberate contrast to the ornate extravagance of the French court. At Versailles, where he once appeared in the same plain velvet suit without a wig, he was a sensation. The French aristocracy, bored with their own formality, adored him as an exotic specimen of natural genius and republican virtue. His portrait was reproduced on medallions, snuff boxes, and even chamber pots. He was the face of America. Yet, behind this public persona, Franklin the shrewd negotiator was always at work. He used his popularity to gain access, to build trust, and to patiently, persistently advocate for the loans, military supplies, and ultimately, the formal Treaty of Alliance that arrived in 1778 after the victory at Saratoga. The rhythm of these ambassadorial evenings followed a calming pattern. There would be a fine meal, but not an opulent one. Then, perhaps a demonstration of one of his scientific curiosities, a model of a stove, an electrical apparatus, serving as both entertainment and proof of American ingenuity. Music might be played. Franklin was an avid musician who had invented a glass harmonica, for which Mozart and Beethoven would compose. Talk would linger into the night, often on scientific or philosophical themes, subtly reinforcing the idea that America was a nation of thinkers, worthy of partnership. These gatherings built a web of affection and respect that made the cold calculus of statecraft personally compelling to the French elite. Franklin's correspondence during this period was another kind of evening work. By candlelight, he wrote hundreds of letters to Congress, to fellow agents in Spain and the Netherlands, to French ministers, to friends. His pen was his primary tool, and with it, he managed a vast, clandestine network of support, dealt with privateers and prize courts, and tirelessly explained America's needs. The calm, reasoned tone of these letters, even when reporting setbacks or pleading for funds, was a testament to his unflappable nature. He understood that desperation is a poor negotiator, patience and poised assurance were his currencies. Yet, amidst the whirl of diplomacy, one can imagine quieter moments. Perhaps looking out from his terrace at Passy over the Seine, a river so different from the Charles of his youth. In those solitary reflections, he bore the immense weight of his nation's hopes. The fate of the war and of the experiment in self-government rested significantly on his ability to charm a kingdom. The calm he projected was not merely tactical, it was a necessary discipline to manage the anxiety of such awesome responsibility. His evenings of social triumph were preceded and followed by long hours of meticulous, lonely calculation. Thus, the ambassador's evening was a multifaceted performance, a blend of theater, psychology, and profound statesmanship. It was in these Parisian salons that Franklin helped secure the French alliance that turned the tide of the war, bringing crucial funds, a powerful navy, and international legitimacy to the American cause. He did so not with threats or grand pronouncements, but with conversation, wit, and the irresistible appeal of a calm, wise, and intriguing man. He turned diplomacy into an art of peaceful persuasion, proving that the most powerful agreements are often reached not across formal tables, but in the warm, trusting glow of a shared hearth and stimulating talk, late into the European night. The last chapter of Benjamin Franklin's long and astonishing life was written in Philadelphia, in the comforting embrace of the city he helped to build. Returning from France in 1785 as a national hero, he sought not rest, but purposeful engagement in the next great challenge, constructing a lasting framework for the nation he had helped to birth. Though plagued by gout and kidney stones, his mind remained as agile and curious as the boy by the Charles River. His home on Market Street became, once again, a center of influence, but now the conversations were framed by the daunting task of defining a perpetual union under the proposed Constitution. Franklin's role at the Constitutional Convention of 1787 was emblematic of his final years. At 81, he was the convention's elder, its moral authority and calming presence. He attended every session, carried to the State House in a sedan chair by prisoners from the Walnut Street Jail, a humble, poignant image. He spoke infrequently, often having his speeches read by others, but his interventions were crucial. He urged compromise on the most fractious issues, like representation in Congress, famously advocating for the great compromise that created our bicameral legislature. His final speech, a powerful plea for unanimous support of the document despite its imperfections, was a masterpiece of pragmatic wisdom, asking every member to doubt a little of his own infallibility. In these final years, the rhythm of his life slowed to a gentle andante. He spent hours in his garden, corresponded with scientists across the globe, and doted on his grandchildren. He revised his autobiography, leaving for posterity not just a record of events, but a manual for self-improvement and civic virtue. His scientific curiosity never dimmed. He designed a longer-reaching arm for taking books off high shelves and speculated on the causes of the common cold. Even in pain, he maintained his famous equanimity and wit, writing humorous dialogues about his gout and composing droll epitaphs for himself. He approached his own mortality with the same calm observation he had applied to electricity or ocean currents. His public passions turned to the final great cause of his conscience, the abolition of slavery. As president of the Pennsylvania Society for Promoting the Abolition of Slavery, he signed a powerful petition to the First Congress in 1790, using his last ounces of political capital to argue that the liberty won in the Revolution was a universal right. It was his final public act, a courageous and controversial stance that reminded the new nation of the unfinished work before it. The calm of his retirement was not the quiet of disengagement, but the focused energy of a man tying up the moral loose ends of his life's work. As the spring of 1790 arrived, Franklin's formidable strength began to ebb. He spent his days in bed, in a room filled with books and papers, the tools of a lifetime of inquiry. Visitors reported that he faced his end with serene acceptance, discussing philosophy and the future of the Republic until very near the end. The constant pain was met with patience, a final demonstration of the self-discipline he had preached for decades. He died peacefully on the evening of April 17, 1790, with his grandson at his side. The cause was an infection in his lungs. The great respirator of ideas and persuasive air finally fell still. The quiet that followed was profound, both in his house and across the nation. 20,000 citizens, nearly the entire population of Philadelphia, turned out for his funeral, a somber, respectful procession unlike any the young country had seen. In France, the National Assembly entered into 3 days of official mourning, an unprecedented honor for a foreigner. The world felt the absence of a unique light, a light fueled not by blind passion, but by reasoned optimism, practical genius, and an unwavering, calm belief in the possibility of progress. He was the bridge between the age of reason and the age of revolution, and his passing marked the closing of an era. Yet, the final quiet was not an end, but a transition. Franklin's legacy was not entombed with him. It lived on in the institutions he founded, the documents he helped shape, the scientific principles he elucidated, and the quintessentially American character he embodied: curious, inventive, pragmatic, and resilient. The boy who wondered at the water, the man who harnessed lightning and helped forge a nation, left behind a world irrevocably changed by his calm, persistent application of mind and spirit. His story drifts to a close not with a dramatic climax, but with a soothing, satisfying sense of a long, fruitful day giving way to a rest well earned, his work woven enduringly into the fabric of the waking world.